Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So drop your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. All right, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. Today I'm here with Ed, and then we are joined with another special guest, Matt Markey. So Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in the previous weeks, we've been having our ministry managers join us for conversations about their area of ministry. We've had Marsha on to talk about the Bridge Food Center. We've had Mike on talk about his Hands Auto. So if you guys have not listened to those episodes, just know that they're out there and they're available. But today we're going to be talking about a ministry called Pivot Point Appliance, and Matt is the ministry leader. So Matt, we want to kind of give the listeners an idea of who you are, why this ministry means so much to you, giving people a window into what Pivot Point is, so they can kind of feel the heart and see that in your context. So I'll also encourage listeners, like you can listen on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, but we're also on YouTube. So you can see us right here in the studio. You can see Matt. And the first thing you'll see is that head of hair.
Oh my God.
So let's just get a close up, a single shot on Matt. That's what everybody's going to be wondering that. They had to know. So what's your hair routine?
My hair routine is people, my friends my age are losing their hair and I'm not. So
yeah, so
I'm just going to go a different direction with that.
I think we just went off the rails.
No. We had to go off the rails before people were too distracted.
Wow.
This is what everybody...
All right, if that's what everybody's talking about.
It is funny because whenever we host people for like Beyond the Breakwater workshops, every single time, the two comments we hear about Matt is like, they go to all the different ministries and tour them, and they're like, man, like I was not expecting Pivot Point to grab my heart in the way that it did, but Matt is just an amazing leader. Mm-hmm. And he's got a great head of hair.
I feel like I heard that one time, and so apparently I don't catch.
It made you wildly uncomfortable, so I protected you from all of the other
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So, but in all realness, let's we kind of turn it over to you. So Matt, how did you come to know Pivot Point? Like, what was your introduction to that? When did that start?
I think my introduction to all of our ministries came as just being a member at Messiah Church, mm-hmm. right? Like when you go to church and you hear Sunday morning messages, Ed's sharing stories, right? So my introduction is literally just, hey, this is something that my church does. Mm-hmm. That being said, pretty clueless. In all fairness to coming to know. You hear a name, you hear a little bit mm-hmm. of a quick side story.
Yeah, and I think with that too, I just realized like our listeners are probably pretty clueless as well as to what Pivot Point is. So I guess before jumping into your like work history, where you come from, how you found it, like what is Pivot Point? Let's give people a reference point.
Sure. So, I think it's important because I think when you introduce Pivot Point Appliance in our community, that's what people think about. They think, okay, you're the appliance place. Why? Because they see the big box truck and it says appliances on it. And they don't even know what that means. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I'm constantly trying to break down some kind of wall of what Pivot Point is just to our neighbors. So I kind of say we are a multi-layered ministry mm-hmm. because we're not just one. And so what you need from Pivot Point may be completely different than what somebody else needs. And so we are a jobs ministry first, mm-hmm. right? So firstly, we are creating employment opportunities for people with barriers that are struggling to get good jobs or keep good jobs. I feel like sometimes you can get the job, but without the right skill set, keeping the job, mm-hmm. and that is a factor. Mm-hmm. And so everything we do in our decision-making model of moving forward in the future is there a job opportunity that can go with this, that can give somebody a chance? Mm-hmm. And then the second layer is the appliance piece. And the appliance piece is truly an appliance sales business. It doesn't look and feel like the standard retail because we're not selling new things. We're taking in donated appliances. The guys, and it's currently guys, but it's the people that work at Pivot Point, take those appliances and they go through them, they refurbish them, and then we're selling them back to the community at massively reduced prices. So when I say multi-layered ministry, there's a job arm that says, okay, can we respond to some community need and create a job opportunity with I desire to see growth and go somewhere that is an elevation of somebody's life. And then there is the appliance arm that is just, are you struggling financially? And did your big thing break? Or do you need a big thing that we can provide you without breaking the bank? So those things exist. That being said, there's always a desire to, how can we do better? How can we grow? Right? And that's a huge part of us. So the constant filter is there a community need that we have some capacity to respond to that can also create a job?
Matt, could you just explain, when you say appliances, I mean, that could be blenders.
Oh,
so
sure.
What kind of appliances are you talking about?
So, and when I say appliances, we deal with big home appliances. The primary is washer, dryer, refrigerator, your range. We get away from some things that really people struggle with. The install is an issue because we stand behind what we sell. Even though we're selling refurbished appliances, we fully test them and they're coming with a 90-day warranty. So when you're talking about just the appliance ministry, we hope and believe that when somebody is really struggling, that they can confidently spend the little bit of money they do have to get through. So your washing machine breaks down is probably one of the most common things we hear. And the schools will call CPS if the kids aren't coming to school with clean clothes, right? So this isn't just, geez, it'd be nice.
Yeah.
It is, I have to have the ability to wash clothes. Go to your local laundromat and do your laundry for a week. And then you're going to see how astronomically expensive that is.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. The same would go for people who go shopping at the bridge. If they buy perishable food, they got to put it somewhere. So you need a functioning refrigerator. Otherwise, the savings they got shopping at the bridge pretty much goes into the trash.
Yeah. I don't think people realize how much of a need appliances are. And that's why I love Pivot Point too, because it's like kind of like a two-prong ministry. Like you said, you have the employment side where you have an employee training program, and that a lot of ministry happens to your staff. Like that's kind of first and foremost. And the avenue that employee training program exists around is appliances, which is also a need, but I don't think people realize it is such a need until you've been in the position where your washer breaks down and it's like every single dollar they have is accounted for already, and they don't have the extra funds to just immediately replace that washer, dryer, refrigerator. And then when you throw family or kids into the mix, it's like you can't care for your family as well. Like there might be things that you personally are okay going without, but then when you put kids on the line, that puts the whole family unit at risk as well. So before we jump into like the intricacies of Pivot Point and the stories, let's jump back into how you got there. So you had mentioned Sunday mornings, you were going to Messiah, you heard little like glimpses of what Pivot Point was through Ed and the stories he would share on Sunday mornings. So where did your employment begin?
I feel like there's a long story that I want to tell the shorter version of.
Okay.
Right? So
Great story.
I was living in a camper on the other side of the state, bouncing back and forth, trying to make things work in a really horrible way from a family. My wife and children lived in Freeland, which is 10 or 15 minutes right from Messiah Church, and we chose to attend worship in Messiah in the balcony, and we had a very sad experience with my daughter She's extremely small, and she went to take communion, and it wasn't good. And it wasn't good because she, growing up, took communion very young. It was important to her. And I'm going to just say an older person kind of passed her by. Like, we're not ready for you to take the body and blood right now. And so it was devastating. And I sent Ed an email and I said, hey, we read on the website at Messiah that all are welcome. And if there's some tradition or there's some standard that we're missing, tell me so we can communicate to our kids. And Ed's reaction was, I don't know who you are, which was very intentional on my part, right? And my wife's part. Like, we were happy to hide for a little while. But he said, next time you're in town, please don't skip me. I left the job I was at, which I believed God had me on this path. I was going to be a YMCA executive director, right? And I believe in what the YMCA should do, but God got me off that path. And so I moved home and called Ed, and I said, hey, I'm available. Just like you said, come introduce yourself. You want to get together for coffee? Ed's reaction was, I always have time for coffee. And so we sat down, and I'm going to guess it was probably 3 hours, right? Like, and it was just talking. It wasn't me saying, woe is me, please help me. It wasn't me saying, do you got any jobs? Because I wasn't really looking. Ed said something really simple, which is, are you handy? And I said, I think I am. And he said, great, because it's easier to find a job if you have a job. That's what he said to me. And he said, and if you're interested and you can help, I have a little project that I need some help with. And literally, this was a Friday. And on Monday, I became a part of the Messiah staff team to do project maintenance work at Messiah. And so I took the job. I was very excited to do it because it was easy to seek employment when I had employment. But I also felt like, okay, I'm still on this people part of who I am. And the maintenance position was very independent work, right? Like, there was opportunities from time to time where you can work with people, but it wasn't forward facing, dealing with people. And I think just my own nature, I stepped into, at some level, every ministry on a very regular basis. I was at the bridge during COVID when it was hard to get volunteers to leave their houses because I could and I wanted to. And I would go have lunch at Pivot Point because I didn't want to eat lunch by myself. And here's some guys that seem kind of cool, right? So what's the big deal? I'll go grab a pizza and I'll find out what's going on over there. I would spend time in the garage because they needed new LED lights just like everybody else did. So there was an opportunity to be there. And then I think just the season of transition that happened at Pivot Point, I was mowing grass and Ed said, hey, you got a minute? And literally he said, I'd like you to consider Pivot Point as an option. I think it'd be a good fit for you.
Do you remember how long it was between like your start to employment as like a maintenance project manager till that point?
I think maybe a year and a half.
Okay.
It wasn't very long. And I think part of that was because I was very consistently like, okay, I like this, but, right? And at the same time, I think Ed and I built a relationship that is maybe a little bit different than many of the people that have kind of come and gone in the Messiah staff team that has been like, okay, I see who you are more than just this thing that you're doing right now. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but there seemed to be something like, okay, there's something more for you, Matt, here in what we're doing than just mow the grass, plow the parking lot.
I didn't know that whole story. That's really interesting. And even like when you said that Ed had said to you, like, it's easier to find a job when you have a job, like that just gave me chills because I'm like, you're doing the very same thing for your Pivot Point staff, like providing them a job because it's easier for them to have a job to then land the next thing.
And that's the crazy part about it, right? Is that there will be people who walk in and their season at Pivot Point is extremely short. But we have needs, right? Like our truck has to roll for us to receive donated appliances to do what we do. And so if we don't have a driver right now and somebody's just struggling to get a job, we can bring you in for a season that may be massively short. And just by, okay, I can pay my phone bill and therefore I can call prospective employers, we're addressing a barrier, right? And so even though when we talk about, oh, what's a typical employee, there is no typical. There's easy to understand, all right? I'm formerly incarcerated. Well, there's a big barrier that the world says, we're not going to let you come work here, right? But if it's just, I can't pay my bills and I need gas in my tank to go get interviews, that's a barrier too.
You can't necessarily change an employee's past, like when they have like a criminal history or formerly incarcerated, like they have a history that you can't change their history, but how does Pivot Point allow them to change like the trajectory of their future?
Well, I mean, I think when we look at everything we do, God is at the center, right? And scripture is at the center. And so when we talk about what we do, why we do it, how we do it, we're different and we know we're different. And we start every single day with devotion. And sometimes it is building faith, but I think at the end of the day, for a lot of our guys and a lot of our ladies, what it is that they have accepted a lie in their life that their greatest mistakes define who they are. And we try to be living grace that says you are not your greatest mistake. You are who God made you to be. And then we try to constantly fuel that through hopefully scripture and devotion, because we would love to see a transition for people whose faith is so low that they just don't believe in God anymore. But there's a lot of people who come into Pivot Point, they believe in God, they just don't know where they fit, right? And so when you say grace doesn't go away and then you prove it every day and they fight you, because they will fight you every day. I'm so broken. I'm just so you hear this as a very regular phrase and you're like, but you're not, right? Like, okay, you're down. Now let's see how we can go forward.
Yeah.
That's how we lift up.
That's got to be really hard to break that mindset. And probably takes a lot of time. And with that too, like this ministry, the Pivot Point ministry, like the employees are your first line of ministry. And then it's like appliances are second. So when you're looking at running a business, or if you have a business mindset, like you might go through a whole work day and not repair one appliance, right? Because it's like
there definitely are those days, right?
Yeah.
Like there are definitely those days, and they're extremely difficult and hard. And at the same time, as I kind of evaluate daily, how do we serve better, right? There are also the light bulb goes on sometimes that says, okay, we can't be living in the swamp all day long either, right? And so sometimes just sticking your hands in the machine and just being busy changes the mindset, right? So I would, quick story, is hired a guy to be a driver, a young kid. And the plan is we're going to be on the truck and we're going to go. And very quickly in devotion time, identified like, oh my gosh, his brain needs a break from all of the life swampiness that's going on. And so on the fly, it's like, I'm going to take somebody else on the truck with me, because I think Nathan would be better off today with his hands in a machine learning something, because otherwise he's sitting in a car seat and we worked 10, 15 minutes real hard getting something out of a basement. And then it's let's sit and stew. Right. And so activity can be very
like therapeutic,
healing, right? And so that there's a weird balance, but I think we're constantly looking at how do we elevate, right? And it starts with prayer and scripture, and then it is get busy, right? Like, and it's amazing, get busy doing God's work, and then God takes over in weird ways that thankfully I don't have to, right? Because I would fail epically, where for whatever reason, a broken washing machine can potentially fix a guy today.
What's one of your favorite like highlights, victory moments, just a really great story of seeing that life change happen with one of your employees?
I mean, I'm always prompted to talk about Kenny, because Kenny came to us and it's like one of the harder stories that you ever hear, right? Like 15 years in prison. And we hired him and then within minutes turned him away, right? Like because we asked our employees are required to be clean, and he failed the drug screen. And so we hired him, told him we have a job for you, which for him was this instant burden removed because he was actively seeking employment from the minute he got out of prison and was getting turned away everywhere. And then to say, I have a job for you, and oh, by the way, I actually can't employ you, was tremendously difficult. And so basically we said, hey, look, this is a standard and we can get past this when you're ready to be past this. And so call us back when you think you are ready to come back. And so it was 4 months later. We had actually hired, and a young guy had come and gone. He was there for a significantly shorter season than the normal. And he said, I can pass that test. You still got a job. Absolutely, yes. Let's go. I mean, and I remember sitting in the truck waiting for him to come out of the drug screen test, and he was so happy. He's like, I studied so hard for that test, right? Like, I mean, and so
took him 4 months.
Here is this guy, and he passed the test, and instead of the tears of sadness, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, one more kick in the groin, right, is now like, I finally got this job. And I couldn't even imagine what that meant because I didn't really know him, right?
Yeah.
Like we had spent a couple hours in the truck as a part of an interview. And then when you get to know somebody, here is, I was in prison. My family has pretty much given up on me. I live in community placement with guys that scare me still, right? I don't have a car. How am I going to actually get to work today? And I want my life to be different. I don't know what that means. And so we literally started on day one with, what does that mean for us? We don't know. It starts with devotions. Let's go figure something out. What's the greatest barrier to what? Oh, it's a car today. What's next? It's getting out of this housing situation. What's next? Maybe a slightly nicer car because I got to drive a little bit farther to get to work. What's next? A better job. Right? Because even though Pivot Point offers that opportunity, we're very intentional about not making it so comfortable that they want to stay forever. Right? And it's not because we don't love them. We want them to stay forever.
Yeah.
But we want them to grow into leadership. We want them to grow into mentors for the next person. We want them to say, hey, I got what I needed. Now I'm prepared to give back, which, in all fairness, Kenny gives back, right? Like he's the guy who says, I have a washing machine, come get it, right? And he's the guy who says, what's your problem today? Oh, you don't have a car? I can help you find a car. You need a radiator for a car? I can help you find and he is quasi big brother to the guys that work at the shop now. But the sort of the best story that goes along with it is he's with us for about a year and a half, all kinds of stuff. And just because things are going good doesn't mean things are perfect. And he had, lack of a better way to describe, relapse with parole related stuff. And his parole officer called him in and said, you're going back to jail. And what does that mean? Don't know. It's probably going to be about a week, 2 weeks. And it was like the phone is ringing. Kenny's back in jail. The phone's ringing. Can you try to get a hold of him? The phone. I mean, this was like of all day Fridays, just trying to connect. I'm in processing right now. I can't talk. They'll tell me more when I get there. finally, I think it was 3:00 or something like that, finally get a hold of him. He said, I don't know how long I can talk, but here's the situation. Do I still have a job? Okay, so I'm not going to share his all detail of the story, but the answer is, of course, you still have a job, but what do you need? And he said, I don't really know. I said, come on, what do you need? What can we do for you? He said, I need devotions in my day, and which is flooring to me, right? Because I don't does this stuff work?
Right.
What's God doing here? And there's not always this aha light bulb, it's working kind of thing. And he said, I need devotions. Wait a second. We can make that happen. What does that mean? And so literally he used his call.
He gets one call a day,
One
right?
call a day.
Okay.
He used his call to call the shop. He said, I can get the tablet or whatever it was at 3:00. And so we did pre-devotion in the morning. We prayed as a staff team. What does Kenny need right here, right now? And then he would call in and we would do daily devotion, which is scripture, right? And we're reading the easy version off of our phones because it helped him, because there's some barriers to breaking down what the scripture is saying.
Sure.
And we shared devotions for the 10 days that he was back in jail, and then received him back.
Wow.
Right. Because he didn't do anything that was horrible. I think it was his parole officer wanted him to know this isn't a joke.
Matt, you've told that story so many times, and I always ask you to share that when we have people coming for Beyond the Breakwater events. I think it's the greatest testimony of who you are.
Yeah.
Because when I think about if I was in jail, would I call my employer? I mean, for me, that would be calling the church to talk to people at the church. I think all of us would probably call home or call family or call somebody who cares deeply about us. And I think for him to call you every day because he wanted to be a part of Christ and having a devotion together. I love your heart because I think that story, more than anything else you've ever said or done, I think is like the greatest testimony of just your heart
Well, I'm
and how
say
much you
thank
connect
you.
with people.
And at the same time, I always feel a little bit like it's not about me. And I don't want it to be about me, right?
I think people see
But I
that
say
in
thank you, right? Like,
Yeah.
so thank you. And at the same time, it's like, all right, what's next, right? Like if that can be the super win, I honestly feel like I want 20 more super wins, right? Like, and that's the selfish me of this. Like, okay, if I'm doing it, I just want to do it better.
So tell the rest of the story. So he's not at
Yeah.
Pivot Point anymore because there's such a great success in this.
Yeah, so Kenny is we'll call a happy graduate, right? Where once he addressed the biggest life struggle barriers, it was okay, now what do we do? And we're very intentional and are becoming even more intentional about putting people on a career map path. And so he went to school. We got him a scholarship to go to contracting trade school, local partnership we have. And he experienced that, and it wasn't a great one. Why? Because quite frankly, his historical barriers became more painful, right? As much as the world may be prepared to pay a welder $30 some odd an hour to start, that's without life history. You bring life history into the equation and we can keep you down, and we will keep you down. And that really hurt him, right? Because he was told, doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what history you are, we can do this for you. And I think really what it was is his heart wasn't there. He was like, okay, I just want this better paying job. And so then we tried auto mechanic related stuff and worked with his hands and some self-study stuff. He's not a test taker, right? Like he's really not a test taker, but that's okay because it's like, all right, what's next? And can we get you CDL license? And then, so he got CDL license and he hears this guy who might help him get it, and he'll hire him. And he says, okay, so if I go to this interview, I should tell him that I can start in 2 weeks, right? And I said, no, you can tell him you can start tomorrow, right? So he literally went to job interview and started a truck driving job the next day. And was that a blow to Pivot Point? Sure it was, right? Because now all of a sudden our main guy behind the wheel of the truck is gone. And it was also the greatest win we could have had in that moment. It's like the guy who's driving the truck is now driving a truck, right? And I'm side story now. He's now in his second truck driving position. And he called me up last week and he says, hey, you need to talk to Ed. And I said, what do I need to talk to Ed for? He goes, because I need a day where you can come with me and just ride in the truck. And I said, I'll tell Ed, but I don't feel like I need to talk to Ed, right? Like it's called a vacation day, Kenny. And like you're my brother and you want me to do this, we will go and I will ride with you, right? And I just don't know when, right? Because I'm busy. But there'll be a time when, and he sends pictures of his trucks and he stops at my house, right? Like he has not left. He has not left.
That's what I was going to ask too, is like, do you still see these guys? Do you still see Kenny? Does he still stop by? Like what?
Oh my gosh. Kenny literally, I was working on my house and he pulled up in his Harley because he has a Harley now.
Nice.
Right. And he helped me for like an hour and we made some plans to go, like we're going to, do some work on his trailer because he's not real confident.
Talk about his housewarming party.
Oh, he did have a housewarming party. Yeah. So he originally bought a trailer in this trailer park and he is a prideful guy in a really good way. Like the driveway wasn't good. He spent his own money to fix the drive and fix potholes on the road of this place. And the park basically had identified he's a good tenant. And they have like the bulkhead trailer. That's the really nice looking trailer. And they said, hey, when these people move out, are you interested? Do you want this nicer trailer? Because the one he was in was not great, right? It was clean, right? It was dry and warm. And so he moved and he's like, okay, you're coming. Okay, you're coming. And he had his whole family over and he was cooking out. And Leah and I went to just hang out with him and his family for a couple hours just to celebrate his new place. And it's literally a double wide, right? So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I love these stories. And it's like, this is one employee among however many you've had over the past couple years of being in the Pivot Point position. And I mean, before your time, there was a manager and before his time, there was another, right? So it's like, it's been this long sustained ministry where God brings people in and out for a season, both leaders and employees. And to just hear that, like the employees are still like, this is more than just a job for them. Like this is their family. And I think what a beautiful ministry to show the love of Jesus, like that we all have like really like, it doesn't matter our past or if yours is different than mine. It's like, we are all in a place where I think everybody's been like, but if only you knew the real me, or if only you knew what I thought, or if only you knew what I did, you wouldn't want anything to do with me. And hearing that being like kind of the soundtrack that is playing in a lot of your employees' minds, but to say like, we still love you. Like I'm in jail, but do I still have a job? Like, yes. Like I don't work at Pivot Point, but will you come with me to drive? Yes. And just to hear that, it's like that, I feel like is the love of Jesus of like, I know every single thought you have and I still love you. So I think if I were to encourage anybody and as who's listening to this, like these are the kinds of stories that you can be a part of. Like, don't look at all of the obstacles of what it takes to start a ministry like this. Like it is worth it for Kenny. It's worth it for that one person that's life is different because of it. So Ed, you've had a history with Pivot Point from the time that it was started. What are some of your favorite stories?
Favorite stories? Well, it's always about the people. It's about the people, whether they're coming in for the appliance. Because, I mean, that's everything you're saying is just reminding me, Matt, we're in the people business. and appliances are, if you will, the avenue in order to do the people business. And first season, I was managing Pivot Point and in that seat. And so you're talking about employees, and I have a lot of stories with the employees. But I just loved the one day when somebody came in really desperate, and they told me that they had their kids taken away. And they came in and they were frantic, and they just had a little bit of money to their name. They had about $75. And they said they have to buy a refrigerator, and they can't get their kids back without a refrigerator. And we had one, it was a small one, and I think we had it marked at $150. And for me, it was the greatest joy to help a person who had a barrier to getting the kids back. And something like a refrigerator was standing in the way of getting the kids back or not getting the kids back. Mm-hmm. And it was, how much do you have? I have 75. Terrific, sold. And let's get that refrigerator to your house so that you can get your kids back home. Mm-hmm. That's what Pivot Point, it's the people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the appliances become the barrier. And I think that's a favorite story for mine.
Yeah. Are there any stories that you want to ask Matt about that you're aware of that you think listeners would love to hear about?
Well, there's so many, because there's so many people that have come through there. Matt, it's not always pretty. Sometimes you have employees. One is coming to mind. I think you know who I'm referring to, and I'd rather not share his name. But it didn't go so well. I think we tried really hard with a certain individual. There's a great outcome of that story, is that the previous manager actually was a witness to him and helped to lead him into a relationship with Christ, which he didn't have. That's tremendous. But in terms of work history, you kind of jumped in to the second half of that story. So when you jumped into that story, maybe just share the heartbreak.
So sometimes you say it's a heartbreak, and other times I think that when the individual you're talking about left because he chose to leave.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's when you kind of look at, I love these guys so much and I want so much for them. I feel the same way about my kids, right? Like my literal kids, I want so much good for them, and I see what's best about them, and they just don't want it. And it is heartbreaking when they don't want it, because you're like, I will give you whatever it takes for you to get there, and I will bend over backwards. And I think that when we talk about the previous manager still today, right? Like if the phone rang and this guy called, he's going to be there. Yeah. And I know that because we still talk, right? Like we connect and says, have you heard from so-and-so? And what do you know about so-and-so? Right? Like these are conversations we have pretty regular, right? Because we're still friends. And, this guy was struggling, and we sat down and we said, what's the biggest thing? Right? Because we can't do all of it. What's the biggest thing? And when you kind of get to it, it's like, all right, we identified that he needed to put his energy into caring for himself, physically, mentally, spiritually, on purpose. And that even though we ask outcome-based employment all day, every day, right? Like, let's get another washing machine ready to sell. We clearly said to him, that's awesome when it happens. That's not your job. Your job is to work and develop you. End of day, right? And if we can get a washing machine out of the deal, wonderful, right? But you have to do this. And he was so mad at me. You can't fix me like you can fix a washing machine. Well, sorry, right? Like, and we hear from him still sometimes. And it's hard, right? And there's moments where you're like, he talks about, hey, maybe I can come back. I don't know, right? And I'm not going to say no, because I feel like God decides a lot of things. And every time I emphatically say no or yes to anything, God still decides a lot of things. And it's usually not what I've emphatically decided. So I don't know. We hear from him. but it's hard. It's hard to have guys who come in and you see where they could go, and they're just in a weird spot. And you're like, I just pray every day that their joy is theirs and I don't have to define it, and that they actually are joyful and they are filled with spirit. It doesn't matter where they live. If it's in a tent, I feel like it does because that's what I want. Maybe I'm wrong.
Matt, the reason why I wanted you to talk about this individual is because I think for those that are listening, and we talk about going beyond the breakwater, that's what the podcast is all about. When you go beyond the breakwater, I think what nobody prepares you for is not only is it hard, it's messy. And like you say, you want things more than they want for their own lives. And it brings a lot of tears. It brings a lot of heartache. It brings a lot of frustration, like if only. And I feel sometimes like even in that role that I was in your role, it's like you turn the boat around and you head back for the harbor and you're in tears because you feel like you left them beyond the breakwater because they just didn't want to make the journey with you. And I would tell everybody who's listening, when you venture into these ministries, they're hard. And they will keep you up at night, and you will be thinking about people that you're serving and praying for them and grieving over them, hurting over them. And I think those moments, we maybe get a glimpse into God's heart of how much he loves them. And he's called us into very messy ministries and to go and use appliances. That's what's fun. Using appliances as the avenue and the means to go out there and partner with God.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great place to kind of wrap up today's conversation. And we always give listeners something to do before they go. So I'm going to kind of put you on the floor for that one, because as people are thinking about like going beyond the breakwater or going outside the walls of their church, going beyond what they're comfortable with, like you are sitting in that space every single day. Like what do you think people need to know about being in that space? And also, how would you encourage them?
That's it's a hard question only because there isn't a flat answer to that, right? Like it's not. But at the same time, when you're like, okay, can you love your neighbor? And what does that mean? And at the end of the day, we're constantly in need of volunteers to come in and backfill, partly because as humans, we aren't God, right? And so therefore we have capacity that just goes. And so what we really need at Pivot Point is 10, 12, 15, 20 people who will say, I could be a part of that. And consistently you hear messaging like, well, I don't know how to fix anything. Okay, but we all know how to love somebody. And it's not the mushy love thing that guys struggle with talking about, right? Which we share in our devotions all the time, right? Like emotions are girl stuff. Okay, they're not, right? And we need to get over it. But now we are going to say, can you come and be a champion for somebody, right? Like, and you don't have to do that at Pivot Point, but if you're called to, we'd love to have you be there. And are you a third hand physically? Or are you like, no, my hand's never going to touch that, but I can spend time and get to know somebody and then just say, hey man, you're not the worst, right? You aren't that big mistake that you once made. Or are you still struggling with that? Because I can struggle with you. You aren't alone in the struggle. And I think that's probably like, okay, you're not alone in the struggle. And it's the appliance piece, it's the jobs piece, it's everywhere, right? Like they're constantly like, I have some problem and the world is against me and I don't know how to do this. Well, all I can say is you don't have to do it alone. So if you're like, okay, what's the challenge for the person who's listening at home is help somebody some way, somehow, and see where God goes with it.
That's great. Well, thank you, Matt, for the conversation today. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for who you are. I'm just glad that God has you in the position that you are in, because he's used you in ways because I think you're so adaptable and so willing for him to still be in control of those decisions that he's going to make at the end of the day. So thank you for all your ministry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. We will see everyone next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.